What is your small-town dark secret story? We had a crazy rich guy from the 16 to 1700s who saw people robbing a grave one night, so decided that when he died, he would be laid to rest in the roof of a barn behind his house. He believed he'd only be dead for 30 years, so requested that they lock the barn and put the key in his coffin so he could get out, but nobody could get in. He requested that whoever inherited his house, fortune, and belongings would have to give them back to him when he resurrected. He did actually get his wish, but of course he was never resurrected. People stole his bones, and his house is a dentist now. This is also the town where that lady went viral going ham in the alcohol aisle in Aldi a few weeks ago. Ugh, I dare say a Karen going off in any store is infinitely more scary than a guy disconnected from reality thinking he was going to come back from the dead. At least we can presume that guy never bothers people in customer service. There was a woman who was cheating on her husband and got pregnant with him. When she has the child, it was quite clearly not the husband's child, so he kicked her out of the house. The woman broke down and went out drinking, and then, when she was about to return to her husband, she picked up her baby, dropped it down a rubbish chute, and left it there. The next morning, she remembered what she did and went back to find the baby, but, of course, only people with access to the chute can go inside, so she had to wait hours, possibly days, for someone to unlock it and go inside. The baby was long dead by then. The woman killed herself shortly after. This developed into a ghost story later. People say you can hear the baby crying from inside the rubbish chute, and you can hear the woman crying on one of the stairways. A few years ago, a boy who was around my age, he would be 23 by now if he was still around, was up at his family cabin in the mountains of British Columbia, Canada. He was from Alberta and was living there to work at the ski resort during the winter holiday. One night he went to a party at a house, and he only lived a 5-minute walk from there. He was walking home with some friends, and when one of his friends looked back, he was gone. There was a search for him, but he wasn't found. There was no struggle or footprints in the snow. The police asked the people who were at the party, but a lot refused to answer what happened, or they didn't know. He's been missing for 3 years now, I think. His mom hasn't stopped looking for him, and she goes to their cabin once a month for a few days looking for him. She is aware at this point he is most likely dead, but she wants to find him so that she can be at peace. This isn't a secret story nor a part of my small town, but it is in a town where I did grow up going to for the winter holiday. And people think that the people who were at the party know exactly what happened to the kids, so there could possibly be a secret we don't know about. Small high school in Appalachia, just off the interstate. In the early 2000s, MS-13 started moving in, recruiting, since apparently we were a great midpoint on the dog smuggling route to New York City and DC. Few cops, not very sophisticated, no local gangs. But this was a place where half the pickups had rifle racks, and a lot of the poor kids hunted year-round as a key part of how the family ate. When I went there, you could see where the old rifle racks had been removed from the back of the school classrooms a few years earlier. A few gangers moved in, start recruiting, selling hard drugs. Some nasty incidents happened. A few seniors from moonshine families say they want to join up and set up a meeting in a Walmart parking lot, middle of the night, with the gang's senior leaders. They show up, start explaining to the gang guys that the town is off limits. As they're talking, about 100 pickups show up and start roaring around the lot with rednecks in the backs, rebel yelling, and firing shotguns into the air. To top it off, 2 kids whose dads were 2 of the 4 local deputies borrowed their dad's squad cars, pulled in with the lights on, and just sat there. The moonshiners, talking to the gangers, say, "Oh, don't mind the cops, they're with us." Now, I wasn't there. My family wasn't from around here since my parents had moved in only about 15 years earlier. But the story spread and everyone knew who the Holler families were. And knowing a few of those kids, I believe that, while it may have been exaggerated, something did happen. And almost 20 years later, the towns 20 miles north and 10 miles south along the interstate both have major drug and crime issues that started a couple years after the alleged incident, while my old town has basically no issues. Those old families are still there. I mean, I'm all about communities sticking together and protecting themselves without needing to involve others. I guess this is definitely one heck of an example of that. A freshman with Asperger's was being abused by his family at home. He was a problem child and got into trouble on purpose, but no one went too hard on him because of his home life. He was a well-loved kid at school and in the community. One day, just before holiday break in December, he was really sick, but his mom sent him to school anyway. Locked him out of the house. He decided to try to get into one of the empty houses down the street through the chimney. Now, this kid was the size of a second grader, but he was too big to fit through since chimneys taper down thinner. Mom never answered her phone when the school reported him missing. Went a whole day without reporting her kid missing. No one knew what happened to him. It was about a month and a half before we knew what happened to him. We all thought he ran away, was alive somewhere, maybe went to his sister's house. Nope, dead in a chimney. The schools organized an entire week of counseling and such. They wore pink for a day and handed out little pink ribbons on pins for him since his favorite color was pink. Everyone was hit really hard by it. That's how our small town started 2020. It hasn't gotten any better, as you can see. So weird that it's almost been a year now. Okay, so I just want to say this is 100% real. So there is a legit haunted house here. I live in Tepalcatepec, Michoacan, Mexico, by the way. It's a small town. About 6 years ago, these bandits that would go around killing people broke into the town. Luckily, they were kicked out. But what they would do is that if someone didn't so as they say, they would take them to big house here in the town, probably the biggest out of the town. They would take them to the basement and torture them and murder them. The house right now is unowned, and whoever sleeps 5 nights in it gets to keep it. No one resists because they say it's haunted. There are dead bodies in the basement. And to get to one of my friend's house, I have to pass it, and this is the scariest crap I have seen. One time the lights were flickering when I walked by, and I saw a woman standing at the second floor bedroom window looking at me. Then the lights turned off, and I couldn't see her anymore. They say they would also take women and abuse them there and murder them. Explains a bit more about why there was a woman there. Also, right now the bandits are trying to get it again, so I am terrified of seeing the same thing unfold. I didn't live here when it all happened 6 years ago. And I don't want to see it personally either. I found out about everything after middle school when me and my friends sat on the other side of the street in front of the house and told me everything. No one has ever stepped into that house to this day. So, there's an old mental asylum. A young World War I veteran was admitted to the hospital. He'd been shot through the jaw and was suffering from shell shock. During his stay at the hospital, he began suffering from delusions, particularly about the doctor. He went to another hospital for a fortnight's leave, and while he was there, he bought a gun and hitched a ride back to the asylum in a mail van. He arrived at the gates and found the doctor sitting on the veranda. So he shot the doctor and chased him through the grounds. During the chase, he came across a group of nurses and opened fire at them. One nurse was killed and one was wounded. The hospital administrator confronted the patient with his gun and shot him through the hand, forcing his surrender. A wing of the hospital was named after the nurse, and a font was placed in the grounds of a local orphanage. The orphanage is believed to be haunted. The 160-kilogram marble font went missing for years, possibly decades, to the point where almost everyone had forgotten it ever existed, until one day police received an anonymous tip-off to a random alleyway in a nearby city, and they found the font behind some bushes. It took 3 officers to lift it into a van. There are 3 buildings in town that are considered to be haunted: the hospital, the orphanage, and the girls' home. Those are some tragic events, and I don't want to belittle them, but I would have liked to hear a little more about the haunting. How were they haunted? What have people seen? And did they ever learn more about that missing marble font? This was around 15 years ago, but there was a sheriff's deputy that was seemingly a really cool guy. Friendly, cracked a lot of great jokes, etc. He was working at the local high school as a school resource officer and was apparently almost universally well regarded. Well, it turns out that he repeatedly R-ed a 14-year-old. He told the boy that he'd kill his parents if he reported the officer. I don't remember all the details, but I believe this went on for weeks or months before it was found out, and the officer was arrested and eventually went to prison. 15 years ago, the local district attorney called his longtime girlfriend and told her he was taking the day off from work and that he loved her. He parked his car in town and went for a stroll past the local shops. He hasn't been seen since. His car was found where he parked it the next day. He had left his cell phone in the car, but his keys and wallet were missing. Later that year, his laptop, sans its hard drive, was found under a bridge at a nearby river. The hard drive was eventually discovered by a local woman walking along the bank of the river, but it was too damaged to recover any data from. Interestingly, investigators discovered that someone had done a search on his home computer for how to wreck a hard drive. It Did he jump from a local bridge? Did he encounter someone who he had prosecuted who did him harm? Or did he escape his life to start a new one? I really want more information because this is the kind of weird mystery I'm all about. Sadly, this seems like all I'm ever going to hear about this one. Here's hoping the guy is out there somewhere doing okay. It happened to my dad. He had just learned to drive, and him and his buddies were passing through a Native American reserve, rural Canada. My dad was in the passenger seat, and they were going 40+ miles per hour. Out the open window, he heard galloping on the gravel road. Now, it sounded like it was right next to the car. He stuck his head out the window, and at first he didn't see anything. Then he glanced down. A Native American headdress and everything was running on all fours, keeping up with the car. My dad screamed, "Stop the car!" and Jeremy, thinking he was about to hit an elk, slammed on the brakes and they skidded to a stop, and the Native American kept running on all fours down the road. Upon my dad telling his father about this, my dad learned that he too had a similar experience. His father was pike fishing on a canoe in a lake, and on the side of the road where he heard the same galloping and saw a man running on all fours faster than a horse on the road. At his local high school, my dad told his class what happened. He found that almost half the class had heard stories of the man from their parents or had seen it him or herself. My dad says he's glad he moved back to the States away from that town. I'm not gonna lie, it sounds like your dad made up a story to amuse you as a kid, and I think he kind of expected you to realize that by now. It's not much of a secret, but it is cool and scary and relatively famous because it was on that show called Ghost Catchers or some crap. It was the famous show where you see memes from. Anyway, it was a psychiatric hospital called Letchworth in Haverstraw, New York. It's still there today and can be visited if you're sneaky because there's a security guard that patrols the outskirts of the area. I've never been there at night, and I would imagine it's scary, but in the daytime it's super cool. There's hella graffiti and old papers you can take. I have a sign-in sheet dated in like 1934 with a lot of people's names and the different writing styles. The most interesting thing about it is that it looks like everybody just got up and left. There's essentially two parks. There's one that's next to a church in a parking lot. There's a walking path where a lot of people jog and walk their dogs, but going in the buildings is not permitted. If you don't want to risk it, you can just pop your head in, but if you go in, don't stay in there for too long because people will snitch and you get arrested on the spot. However, there's the famous ones that were on the show. It's hidden behind a little bit of forest across the street from the church. You'll be able to see the giant chimney where they burned the bodies and the ashes are still there. Those are the creepy ones. I have videos, but I don't know how to upload them. I'm new to this. Lastly, if nobody stole it, there's a notebook sitting on top of a desk with a marker somewhere on the property near the chimney. Write your name and the date. For the people that are skeptical, no, I haven't seen any ghosts since I took the paper. My hometown is a quiet small town that used to be a train stop/loading station back in the railroad days. The population right now is around 500. There's 5 or 6 bars, so as you can imagine, it's full of drunks. Because it used to be a train loading station, there are obviously tracks that run through our town, and since growing up there, I'm 22 now, there have been about 30 to 40 self-terminations on the tracks alone. Most of the people get drunk or high on M and walk the tracks. Others put in headphones and just start walking. One of the cases from when I was younger, he filled his pockets with knives and ran down the tracks toward the train. Most of the time it's early in the morning, so no one sees them, which means we can't identify them until someone gets reported missing. One guy was identified by a chunk of his collarbone because he had a tattoo, and that's all that was left. And that's only the train track self-terminations. We've had people wander into the woods and hang/shoot themselves and not be found for months when hunters find what's left of them. We've had people jump off overpasses onto the interstate, jump off cliffs into shallow water, crash on purpose, etc. The amount of people who commit self-termination here is unreal. It's probably because it's a poor town full of depressing drunks, but one night my friend and I were reading about the train tracks that run through town, and apparently a bunch of the workers laying the railroad died from some toxic chemicals, and we think they haunt our town and make people kill themselves. This is gonna sound snarky, but I'm being genuine when I say I think what your town needs is access to a therapist. It sounds like the town has some problems, and that is a horrifyingly large per capita self-termination rate for such a small town. I hope the folks there get help. Our town is located at the bottom of a mountaintop where a Christian cathedral and basilica was built. The holy place is a pilgrimage destination that people usually visit on the 1st of May. For those who wish to take the natural way to the top, there's a pathway that starts from our town into a very lush woods up until you reach the cathedral. A truly tranquil and enjoyable experience. Until the incident. A local religious girl in her 20s from our town takes the woods path regularly to the mountaintop. She's done so for years. On the way to the top, there's a small monastery with a lush garden tended by a hired foreign concierge since many years. The girl has reportedly crossed paths with him and had talked to him on many occasions, usually just exchanging greetings on her way up. One day, the girl went on her pilgrimage and never returned. A local search party as well as the police went looking for her. People from the cathedral and the monastery have also helped in the search. Even the gardener himself, as he knew the way around the woods. Everyone thought the foreign concierge had done it, but the fact is he was the most cooperative man out there and helped the search party until they found the girl, dead. Her arm separated from her body in a nearby brush. Signs of struggle are evident on her corpse. There was an attempted R. There were no witnesses in the middle of the woods, no cameras to help. Even if she screamed, no one would hear her. This was going to be another unsolved cold case. Until someone took a deep look at the cooperative concierge's hands. They were too clean for someone who had been working all day in the garden and hasn't come home yet. With a deep inspection, dried blood was seen under his fingernails and they arrested him. He eventually confessed to the R and crime, and was imprisoned. The locals wanted a capital punishment in the middle of the town. They were denied it. After a few years, a prison incident happened, and the murderer escaped and fled back to his home country. A memorial monument is now placed on the natural path up near the place she died. A sad and creepy reminder of what the holy pilgrimage can sometimes turn into. You just hear stuff like this and it makes you feel like you can't trust anyone. That was someone she interacted with time and again, probably thought of him as a friend. I can't blame women for having their guard up with people like this around. Well, it's not my town, but a village where my grandpa grew up. The village is pretty abandoned now and has around 3 families that still live there. So there's a house near the center of the village where no one has lived for at least 2 generations now. People say that there is a cursed treasure there hidden inside one of the walls of the house. The story behind the treasure is that during the Ottoman occupations of Serbia, one unnamed Ottoman officer was passing through the village with a pot of so-called treasures. When he arrived at the house, he asked the people living there if he could get some water for his travels. The people who lived there told him they will bring him some and that he should rest near the tree in the yard. When he got off the horse, a couple men attacked him and tied him to the tree. Then they robbed him of the pot of treasures and mercilessly tortured him for hours before killing him by hanging him on the same tree. It is said that during his final breaths, he cursed them and the treasure, that whoever touches that pot will meet the same fate. The men who attacked and tortured him are said that they had died fairly young and that the man who lived in that house hung himself on that tree. 3 years later, there are at least 2 people who are known to have tried to dig around that house in the 1900s, and both of them hung themselves on that tree. Now, I cannot be certain that there really was a tortured Ottoman back in the day, but the people who killed themselves on that tree in the 1900s are definitely real, since my grandfather knew both of them. These days, no one tries to test the story there. Back in the 80s, a couple were driving a motorcycle when they were stopped by 3 men who then arred the woman while forcing her husband to watch, then killed both. The police caught them not so long after. The same night that they were caught, a mob of 300-plus people gathered in front of the police department, broke in and told the sheriff, "You guys did an excellent job, now leave it to us." The mob broke the cell where the 3 men were, beated them up, and attacked them, alive, into cars and dragged them for 4 miles until a park in the middle of the city, where they set them on fire alive while everybody was clapping and cheering. Almost nobody talks about it now. I don't know if it's considered a dark secret, but in the county I lived in from ages 10 to 18, we had a soldier die under some extremely questionable circumstances. They said he was high, drunk, experiencing mental distress, and raided a nursery, the plant kind. They claimed he was attacked by wasps and ran. He called 911 several times and claimed that someone was chasing him and was trying to kidnap him. In the last 911 call, he said everything was fine suddenly. Just 14 to 15 minutes later, he was struck by a woman who stopped and called 911. He was ran over 2 more times and died. The autopsy showed no signs of bee or wasp stings. The connection to the nursery is due to the fact that it was just up the road from where he died. The place was ransacked, pizza eaten, money taken, but his wallet and phone were sitting on the counter undisturbed. However, the family was not okay with that explanation, especially because he had previously texted that there were some problems with the local boys, since the soldier wasn't from this part of the state. So the family had a private investigator look into it. They analyzed the 911 recordings and found several instances of other people talking in the background, though most of it couldn't be made out, except one. In the 911 call where he told the operator that everything was fine, a male voice could be heard saying, "Tell her." And the nursery? There was no DNA, no fingerprints, no footprints that led back to the soldier. Even though his phone and wallet were there in the building, a lot of people, his family included, think he was killed by some of the local guys there after they got into a fight about something. They chased him down and caught him. He was able to run again after the final 911 call and was hit by a driver while trying to get help. And the police in the county covered the entire thing up because the boys involved were connected to the department somehow. Of the 3 drivers, none were charged for hitting/running over him. I think only the first driver stopped, but it was discovered that one of the other drivers was connected to the department either through family or friendship. It's a crazy story, but you can look it up. Just search Austin McGough. I wouldn't be too surprised since there is a lot of shady stuff happening in small-town police departments, including covering up ours that officers commit. I really hope his family gets him justice. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.